we have the ingenuity, and I believe we have the heart to create a thing, whatever that thing, that singular thing is going to be, to help unleash human potential in the future.
Hungry for solutions, local governments are doing IT for themselves, but not by themselves. Code for America began 15 years ago by popularizing civic hackathons. Then it developed brigades of volunteer coders who were deployed all over the country. Now it's leaning into AI while standing firm on DEI. We're putting the future of civic tech in context.
TFIC takes you deeper into the stories that are shaping the future of state and local government.
From government technology and governing, this is The Future in Context. With Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor.
15 years after putting the civic in civic tech, Code for America is pivoting to come alongside local governments to take on the challenges they face today, bringing collaborative expertise to the use of AI in the public sector, and defending gains made through diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in government. The organization made its name by helping government better use and often liberate or democratize the data it holds and developing citizen apps through early hackathons and making a network of volunteer developers available to public agencies that could not marshal those resources by themselves.
We recently sat down with Amanda Renteria, the CEO of Code for America. The conversation was equal parts look back at the organization's origins and legacy and look forward to the opportunities for building out a civic tech ecosystem that works for all. Ashley led out with some questions about her background and biography.
We really appreciate you joining us to discuss how technology can work to make government services more equitable and accessible. And we're also excited to learn how that kind of dovetails into your role as CEO of Code for America. So, first, I wanted to start with you telling our audience a bit about your background and how you arrived at this point in your career where we actually have the esteemed pleasure of interviewing you. So, specifically, can you share a bit about your personal and professional journey and what led you to become the CEO of Code for America?
Well, thank you for having me first. And I'm super proud to be at Code for America. Largely, my career is based on being a public servant for most of my life. And the reason why I decided to do that is because I did grow up in one of the lowest income communities across the country. And I've had opportunities to get educated, to choose my job, many of the things that my parents, who started out as farm workers, really didn't. But what made it possible for me to be where I am is that we had a government and a democracy that had the kind of policies that made the American dream, I suppose that's cheesy, but made the American dream accessible to me. So as I've thought about my career, I have a deep sense of responsibility of figuring out how do I make sure that is true for the next generation. So I've spent most of my time in policy and politics, working at all levels of government. Was the first Latina chief of staff in the United States Senate. Worked on a presidential campaign, and then in 2020, I began to look at a broader world outside of government, thinking, how are the things that I have fought for, worked for, helped create in life? How is that actually affecting people? And when I looked at organizations that were doing that kind of work, Code for America stood out because they had figured out how to do the implementation side of policy. They had figured out how to reach people in my hometown. I guess I'll just end with this too. It was super validating when I started to work for Code for America because my parents have always wondered what I do in policy or politics, but they knew Get Cal Fresh. Get Cal Fresh is a program that links people where I grew up to food assistance programs, makes it easy, dignified. And so finally, my parents knew what I did. And it felt a little like coming back home, like the job I always wanted to have, because that's the kind of policy, those are the kinds of benefits that make it possible for a kid like me to end up here talking to you.
Thank you for that. And that is an amazing why for why you do what you do. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. As far as experiences, if you're taking a snapshot look at your entire career, what experiences have shaped your views on technology's role in society, particularly in the public sector?
Yeah. So when I grew up in California, which is often viewed as technology forward, I went to Stanford University. Also, have a bunch of friends from there who was right outside in Silicon Valley. My first job, a government job, was at the city of San Jose. Who also I got to see how technology can be used, and so in many ways for me, I come at it in from two different venues. One, when I was in government and seeing how we were absent from the discussion of technology, which is a powerful tool for distribution, powerful tool in our country, and yet there weren't a lot of policies around it. So that was one noticeable factor. The other noticeable factor is when I think about things in my hometown, I recognize what it's like to not have technology. Woodlake, where I grew up, we were 17 years behind um, the rest of the country in getting broadband, as an example. And so I recognize the impact it can have, and also the impact if you don't have access, or technology implementation, I'd argue, isn't done well or doesn't exist. I think about it much more holistically than actually just a tech tool.
And that makes perfect sense. We cover a lot of stories about broadband and accessibility. So you pointing that out is really something that sticks out to me. If you're taking a look at going deeper into your background, how have your previous roles influenced your approach to leading an organization when we're talking about like leadership skills? But an organization like Code for America, how have your previous roles influenced that?
Code for America is a beautiful combination of folks who come from government, who come from technology, who come from nonprofit. So the idea of working for and with a group of folks who come from different experiences, different talents and skills, and the way it works is that we all come together to solve a problem. I would argue government is very similar. Working in government and politics, in order to be successful at it, you really do have to understand how to connect to different communities and understand the problems you're trying to solve. You do encounter quite a few different people coming from all kinds of different backgrounds in the government sector and space. And so I have loved getting to meet people who are different than me, who have come up and have experiences that are different than me. And I think it's why Code for America is successful, but when and why government is also successful, when you can bring that together to solve a problem.
So, building on that, your last answer, Code for America really grew up with this thing that we call digital government, the intersection of policy, practice, and technology. And in fact, I think Code for America deserves credit for being a catalyst for a lot of that growth of digital government becoming a reality in big places and small places, including but not limited to your hometown.
Okay.
There were the early hackathons, there were the brigades that took that innovation and that knowledge to places that simply couldn't get there by itself. All of that to ask these two questions. What were the key learnings through the first generation of Code for America, and what remains undone?
Well, it's interesting you say digital government, because when I think about when this movement first started, the idea was just to say the word civic tech and people knew what that is. People knew what hacking was. People knew a group of people coming together to try and solve a problem. And now, just like you said, digital government, there's gov tech, there's public interest tech. That's an indication that we made it. The movement has moved forward. What happened in COVID that was really important is we didn't just make it, we started to be relevant and important to government in order to have digital delivery of services for the first time, and in a crisis and in the very moment. That fundamentally meant we not only built trust and relevance and the space for digital government, we also came to the table in partnership with government in that crisis. And so I am hopeful as we think about the future that we're no longer, banging on the door to get in the room. We're no longer in a crisis where we have to act fast and just help and do whatever we can. Now we're in partnership where we can look out into the future and say what problems are coming at us and how together civic tech, government tech, work together to actually solve those problems ahead of time with technology when technology is the answer to solving a problem.
Let's talk about impact and how it gets measured. What does Code for America use to decide whether it's making a difference and how it can make more of a difference?
So this has changed over time for us too. When we first started the movement, we actually, we measured it by how many volunteers, brigades, if you knew civic tech, that was the measurement. As we evolved into actually creating solutions, our application of Get Cal Fresh, for example, we were able to then really create the outcomes, right? Million people we helped, $29 million in benefits were delivered. You could really make that tangible. I would say we will still, and the industry really still continues to show and to measure how they actually help people directly. But we are actually now, as we partner with government, starting to think of the systems change. So part of more of our measurements today are, how did we help government change its behavior? How did, for example, in Louisiana, after a hurricane, they proactively texted their recipients of Medicaid, their recipients of food assistance, and said, hey, here are some programs that you might be eligible for at this very moment. So seeing behaviors of something like that, Louisiana change, and be proactive, that is our measurement of success. Or another one I'll put on the table that made me, it's a little geeky, but it made me very proud, is when Direct File, what came out, it was a pilot that the IRS first tested with governments, employees, and then tested with the small group of people, and then went to more states. That iterative approach is not something that was true in government 15 years ago, but you're beginning to see that behavioral change. And that part means that we are changing systems, we're changing the way we're serving people, that builds more trust and in our systems. And so we measure it a little bit different. And I suspect over time, our measurements will continue to change. But as I look back, I'm excited how we've evolved over time, because it does mean we're creating that kind of proactive government that really strengthens trust in democracy.
If you look at your own pipeline, can you name 2 or 3 things that you're particularly excited about?
What I'm most excited about is our File Your Taxes application that is involved in the Direct File pilot, and now involved in the second phase of Direct File, where states across the country will be able to easily file taxes, both at the state level and at the federal level. And so our File Your Taxes application helps states link to the Direct File work that the IRS is doing. And it's super exciting, because what it does is it makes filing your taxes much easier than ever before. I'm super proud of the fact that we have now helped the IRS move to a system where you can actually do it much easier than ever before. So that's one. So everyone should take a look at Direct File. It is going into its second phase next year, and it will be in 25 states. I'd say the second that we are seeing is something like we've seen in Minnesota, where people could apply for 9 different benefits in one process. We are seeing more and more states take on multi-application efforts. It's great. Not only on the outside, not only does it feel right to the client, right, to people who are actually interacting with government. You don't have to go through 8 different people. You can go through one process. But on the other side of it, we're helping caseworkers as well make sure that as those applications come in, they're easy to manage on the backside as well. So that's another one I'm really excited about, which is our integrated benefits work. How are we helping government integrate that benefit application? And then I would say one of the other areas of work that I'm really excited about is childcare. Childcare in general. There's a lot of work going on in childcare, whether that was the child tax credit that we helped build when the advanced child tax credit passed, or whether that's childcare and how do we make sure that people who have kids and they're trying to actually find a provider, that we're using technology to help make that match. So that's just 3 of them.
We are at another one of those really interesting moments. AI is eating government, and it's doing so at speed. Curious, where do you fall on the divide between doing it fast or doing it safely? The industry seems to be a little divided on that. Where are you?
I have a real urgency to help government be educated and ready for AI. Our journey at Code for America when AI first came out was, let's see what it is. What tools are there? And we stepped back and went through our own process at Code for America, which is first, let's learn about it. Let's work with staff, talk about what it is, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and then let's build up some tools where we see um, AI can help with a problem we have, with the barrier we have. We went through that process ourselves and as an organization. And then as we had conversations with our government partners, we began realizing that that was the right process as well for our government partners and for government in general. And so I have a very big urgency to do everything that we can in this moment to really help folks in government understand what it is. What are appropriate guardrails, right? When do I have to be worried about it? How do I manage this tool? And so what we did is a couple of weeks ago, we launched our AI studio, and it launches with really workshops first, where there's a safe place where people can do hands-on workshops, work with each other, different cities, different governments, talk about what problem they're trying to solve and when AI is the right answer and when it's not. So I come from the place of AI is coming into government. How do we make government ready for it?
AI studio that you mentioned sounds really interesting because when you think about it, with any newer technology, you are somewhat diving into the unknown until you run those proof of concepts or those pilots and kind of test everything. So, with that in mind, how do you think that governments can ensure that AI is used to reduce rather than exacerbate existing inequalities that may occur?
One is recognizing that a lot of the data that is out there is already built on a not diverse population generally, right? So when you think about all the data that is out there, folks who haven't had access to broadband aren't anywhere in that equation. So if you're building a program that's trying to get to people who've never been online, you're going to have the wrong kind of information. So I think number one is we have to start with the premise that the body of data that we're using is biased in itself. Second piece is making sure that as we start, we understand why we're using a particular tool. What problem are we trying to solve? Third, start small. Start small to learn how this tool and product works. And then AI is something you can't leave alone. So build in milestones and feedback loops so that it's ever evolving and that the way of managing it is also evolving and you're testing and measuring consistently. I am super excited, not just about the potential of AI someday, but I'm super excited about government and people in government being able to manage this powerful tool. And in both ways, one, to make sure they can protect people, two, to make sure that they can actually help people in a better way than we are today as a government.
In addition to that, what principles do you think should guide the development and implementation of AI in public services in order to, once again, ensure that it is equitable and inclusive?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned principles because we just put out our blog of AI principles today on
Oh, wow.
codeforamerica.org. So we have about 10 or so principles. And what you'll see is how you do ethical AI, making sure you're protecting people's data. It has an example in there about how we apply AI. One of those things are in an answer back to somebody in a chatbot, we say, this is an AI generated response. And then we give them the response so that we're not pretending the AI is a person, but we're actually openly saying this is an AI product. So people know. We make sure within our AI tools that we are being careful with the data, that we will not sell or share the data. And we're very open with that too. And so there are certain steps that you can take to make sure, and you'll see the same things that I just said before in our principles. Start small, iterate, put people first. All of those are in our blog today. And so I'd encourage everyone to take a look because that is one of the most important things as government starts to play with AI. And even as people start to interact with government, what should they watch out for? What should you ask about the data that this AI tool is asking for? Right? How do you make sure that that data is protected?
We will link to those principles in the show notes at tfic.tech. Shameless self-promotion isn't above me. Wanted to ask you about equity in general. It's felt for the last little while that there was a tailwind to it all. And there's been a little bit of pullback, or maybe there's been a lot of pullback by industries that we may or may not be aligned with, but the players kind of shape the thinking. Google, Meta, Lyft, X, they have all backed off their DEI programs. What does that say, and what does that mean for the effort to move forward, both as the technology advances and the movement around equity and inclusion seems to be shifting a bit?
I think, I guess this is where I think about it from a political standpoint, where the word equity is problematic in and of itself. It's just become a hot word that people divide themselves on. I don't believe, though, that people are against having a government that works for all. I do believe everybody wants a government that works for all. Maybe I'm hopeful, maybe I'm optimistic, but that's certainly what we're trying to do at Code for America. And so whether this word is in or out of favor really doesn't change our mission or what we're trying to do, which is to make sure that we do have a government that works for all. And what that means is when you're trying to reach a low-income rural community, you do it differently than when you're trying to reach a low-income urban community. That's the working for all. So just because you do it differently, which some people might say equitable, it's still getting to this premise that we are for all. And so for me, I understand that there are words that get into this political sphere, particularly in a partisan kind of environment that we're in right now. And at Code for America, what we try and do is we try and make sure that we are adhering to the principles of universal reach, which is at the core of what government's supposed to be doing.
Is it disappointing, though, that some of these large players have backed away? And is it a setback for the movement in general?
I think I look at it a little bit as a Latina woman, a little bit, it makes me sad because it means some people are worried about inclusion and equity. But I also feel a deeper sense of responsibility to figure out how we get back to a world where we really do believe government for all. And so on the one hand, I suppose I use that sadness or that disappointment to work even harder to say, wait a second, how do we make sure that this is for all? And let me tell you why that's a beautiful thing in the world for you, for your kids. When you think about it, our kids, the majority or the fastest growing racial ethnicity right now is mixed. Think about that, right? If we are not for equity and inclusion, what are we doing? We're raising a set of kids who are growing up themselves understanding equity and inclusion. So at Code for America, if I have to use another word, I'll do it because it matters for when we see the future of our kids who already in who they are understand that we are an equitable and inclusive society already in their minds.
Given the future that you just laid out, let's talk roles and responsibility. Let's begin with role of public agencies, particularly local governments. Also like your thoughts on the role and responsibilities of the tech industry. And where does Code for America fit in?
Yeah, so that's a big question. So let me maybe start with the end. So one of the great things about civic tech has always been we've seen ourselves as problem solvers. And when the movement first started, we were just trying to get into the table. As I see it next, we were problem solving in a crisis. And now we're at the table, problem solving with government, trying to get ahead of the curve this time. Instead of being in crisis and solving, really trying to predict what are the problems we're going to have and working together to do that. I see Code for America and civic tech really in that space in partnership, solving problems that government can't do on its own or the private sector isn't doing. That's really where we are. The role of local government, I think, continues to be the connector on the ground where people really see democracy in action. And so when I said, my parents knew Get Cal Fresh, right? That was a local distributed program, right? What the government said about don't forget to apply mattered. right? What the mayor said about that really mattered. And so I still see local government as really a trusted entity that that is right there in your community.
Where does the tech industry fit? What is its role? Because clearly civic tech can be on its own trajectory, but it's
Right.
always nice to have allies in the industry and not be facing pushback.
Yeah, well, I think it's also our job to push our partners in tech, the people working in tech, to think about technology as unleashing human potential as opposed to unleashing shareholder value. And I know that's very hard when you're a private sector company, but if we want the world, if we want our kids to live in a world where people care about each other, where humanity is something we all want, we've got to move our tech in that direction too. And that's a harder task because I would love to expect businesses or technology to do it themselves, but the incentives for shareholder value are a little too strong. And so it's going to require us as a people, us as workers in tech organizations, to say, I want more than just shareholder value. I want the tech industry to care about humanity, to care about our kids, to care about what kind of world we're going to live in the future. Again, I wish it was a little different. I wish tech got there on their own, and some will, but we need to do more on the outside to say this is what we want out of technology use.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of touch back on the ethical component of this
Yeah,
all because when you think about ethics versus legality, you think
yeah,
about how the progression of AI just kind of spurred and there were no laws to regulate it. So then we're playing catch up with the government and policymakers, right? So keeping that into consideration and thinking about, just the ethical considerations, not even the legal,
yeah.
particularly in serving marginalized communities. How is Code for America balancing that? Like the benefits of AI, what are those benefits and balance?
Yeah. One of the most important things is for us to be transparent, right? We don't charge, we don't sell your data, and we are very, very transparent about that. I think the other is before we even build something or do something, we ask the question whether it's going to make matters worse, whether it's going to harm people. And we take that question extremely seriously because people trust us, both the clients we serve or our partners in government. So perhaps we have even a higher ethical bar. But I do think one of the things we're doing in our AI studio is talking openly about how do you do this, right? How do you make sure that you're being transparent? How do you make sure that you're taking care of people's data? What systems and controls do you have in place to make sure that happens? So it has to be actually an intentional effort. And I understand why in government sometimes that's hard. The bureaucracy is a little bit hard to work through. But we at Code for America will do our best to continue to try and really talk through and educate people about our tools, what we do with their data, how we're helping, and how we're taking precautions to not harm folks.
So, Amanda, looking ahead, what are the key priorities for Code for America in shaping the future of civic technology? And how will CFA measure its success in the next chapter of digital government?
This is a great question, and I'm excited about the future of civic tech because we have never been more at the table than we are now, and the decisions that we make now and the way we partner with government will really have implications for a generation. And so the way we measure it is, are we bringing human-centered technology into government? Are we teaching our partners what that means to center the people they serve, not just by mission, but by actually delivery of benefits? And so for us, we measure that by, did people get their benefits? Was it easy? One of the measurements, as an example, for our tax product was, I don't know if I should say this or not, but doing my taxes is actually kind of enjoyable. It's things like that we look out for, right? We get messages of, I had a hard time and I have having a hard time in life, and seeing how helpful it was to use your product to access food assistance really mattered and made life a little easier for me. Those are the kinds of interactions where that is actually the norm, where we come to expect that when you're having a baby, you're informed about what kind of child tax credits there are out there. Or when you're going to go to college and want to figure out, how do I get a loan, or how do I get a government FAFSA application. It actually walks you through that application process. Or when you're trying to start a business, right? Government actually meets you where you are. Those are the kinds of things that I not only hope for in the future, but that Code for America is really leaning in on, to make sure that at the end of the day, we have a government that actually feels like it sees you, the whole you. When you're having a baby, when you're having a hard time, when you're going to college, when you've got a new job, and tries to make it a little bit easier in order to help unlock your own potential. And then I hope along the way, I guess I'd say it this way, I hope along the way that we don't become so technology oriented that we actually lose the humanity in it. Because that at the end of the day is really what will give trust back into government, what makes living what it is, and fundamentally what makes people believe in democracy too.
And those were all great examples. The first one that you gave about them saying that, hey, I actually enjoy doing my taxes now is astronomical, because I've never
Yeah,
heard anybody say that in life.
exactly.
So
And
that's a
frankly,
big
we didn't
deal.
just get one. There was like a handful of people said it, which was
That is awesome.
encouraging.
Right. And so, how do you envision the role of civic tech evolving in the next decade, particularly in light of rapid technological advancements and societal changes?
So I think we're going to see more civic tech sitting with government before the problem, being able to predict and help government assess what's happening and what is needed, much like the Red Cross does when there's a crisis, right? They have learned now what are the things that government needs to be ready for when a flood happens. In the same way, civic tech can be the eyes and ears, not just of crisis, but also of opportunities. And we're living that exactly right now. I actually am hopeful about AI because I remember being on the Hill when a senator called the internet a set of tubes. We are very different now. You have states who have policies out there, be it right or wrong, they are actually talking about it. And if we're talking about it, we're learning about it and we're going to get better at it. And I am excited about civic tech playing a role in that, being partners in that moment, so that we're not talking about the internet as a set of tubes in the future, but in fact, we're thinking about both its opportunities and its risks.
Can I just push a little bit further into the future with you on
Yeah.
that, and keeping the humanity, which has been part of your theme as we've talked this afternoon? And maybe it's a little bit of a crystal ball question, but
Okay.
Ray Kurzweil is well known for talking about the singularity, that magical moment when a general intelligence equals or exceeds human capabilities in doing all the things that has traditionally defined what it means to be human. And his date that he has stuck to for decades is now just a generation away. How ought civic tech be thinking about the fact that singularity is getting pretty near by the original timelines, and the technology is starting to deliver on the promise? How does Code for America, how does civic tech start to think about that inevitable future?
So I think there's two different ways we think about it. And first, I'll just say we often talk about human centered technology. Human is the first word we say. And it's the first word we say for two reasons. One, how technology serves humans matters. We can't forget that technology is still serving humans for better and for worse. Second, how we develop technology is on us too. We decide. I look around at we had an 800 person summit, and looking around the room, it was, we are going to decide what that thing looks like in the future, right? Whether it is a good human, whether it is a bad human, we get to create it. Makes me a little bit sad. If you listen to some people, they're like, yes, that's exactly what I'm afraid of, because we also have bad humans. I'm more hopeful than that. I am more hopeful that we have the ingenuity, and I believe we have the heart to create a thing, whatever that thing, that singular thing is going to be, to help unleash human potential in the future.
This has been a delight. Thank you very much. Appreciate you doing this, Amanda.
Thank you.
Code for America CEO Amanda Renteria. We have links to the AI resources you mentioned in the show notes. Our editorial and production team includes Theo Douglas, Zoe Manzanetti, and Kaylee Tedrow. Our executive editor is Noel Nell.
Hey, it's Ashley with a quick reminder to subscribe to The Future in Context for free on Apple or Spotify. And if you like what you're hearing, why not send a link to someone who doesn't listen to the show yet? Thanks for the help.
The next time out, the future of state CIOs with Doug Robinson, who has led their national organization for 2 decades. That will do it for us this time. Thanks for listening. For Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor. Always forward.